On today's episode of the Launchpad Podcast, we are going to be talking about the Rockets' third Summer League game against the San Antonio Spurs, the impacts of social media on some of the Rockets players, and maybe a potential Donovan Mitchell trade. So stick around. We have a great show for y'all today on the Launchpad Podcast.
Houston, Roger, we copy and we're standing by for your TV.
They throw it up. Oh, there goes Jalen Green. Humans can't fly. Rebound picked up by Green, who's back in. Plays it ahead of board. Back to Green. Oh, and in time for Thanksgiving. But there's plenty of yams to go around for everyone.
Welcome into the episode of the Launchpad Podcast presented by Clutch City Control Room. As always, I'm your host, Don Knock. Find me on Twitter at Don Knock. You can find the pod at Clutch City CR. If you go in the description there, you can find the YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast links. As always, I'm joined over there by my fellow host, Paulo Alves. Paulo, tell the people where they can find your stuff.
What's up, everyone? Y'all can find me on Twitter at PaulAlvesNBA. That's PAULOALVESNBA. Everything I do from podcasts like this one to the live shows on Twitter Spaces will find itself linked on there.
And today, making his first return appearance on the Launchpad Podcast, one of the original hosts of this show. He's now over on Clutch Fans on the Rocket Fuel podcast over there with also a friend of the show, Anthony Duckett. We have Lashard Binkley. Lashard, welcome back to your own show that we liberated from you, unfortunately. How are you doing today? Tell the people where they can find all your stuff.
I'm doing great. Of course, you can always find me on Twitter at Binkley's Hoops. I also write for the Dream Shake, so you can always find my written words there. And like I always tell Anthony, I always get close to slipping up when I do my intro. I almost always say the Launchpad Podcast. I get close every single time, but I haven't slipped up yet. So I'm still working on that.
I've almost said hosted by Apollo HOU instead of Clutch City Control a couple times, but we can edit that out if I was ever to slip, thankfully. But
definitely,
yeah. So for those of you unfamiliar with the show, I was on Lashard's pod the first time I was on a pod. It was him and Nima, friend of the show, Finding Nima, and then the first time I did Launchpad is with Lashard. So circle of life thing here. Yes. Now Lashard is back on with us. So again, I want to thank you for being here. We have a good show for y'all today. Obviously, the Rockets coming off a win. Everyone, I'm sure, loves to see that.
Yeah.
And it's just Summer League, so we won't have to get into tanking and what this means for the women Yama sweepstakes just yet. But we're going to talk a little bit about that game. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the social media things we've seen in the last 24 hours with some of the Rockets players. They have been quite active. And then we're going to talk about a report that came out a little earlier today about Donovan Mitchell potentially being up for a trade. So just to start off, Lashard, what was your big main takeaways from this third game against the San Antonio Spurs? Obviously the Rockets, like we mentioned before, getting a win. Who did you like in this game? Who do you thought played well? And who did you think, maybe didn't have so great of a game?
Well, I mean, first off, it was real interesting because they actually had their worst first half, or at least first, quarter and change, to start the game, probably of any of the other two games. I mean, they started off real slow. They weren't getting back on defense. They had horrible rotation. They couldn't make shots. They would turn the ball over left and right, which has kind of been a theme all Summer League long. And then it just seemed like they just kind of flipped the switch. And actually, it kind of started. I mean, Tyree Eason was playing well the entire game, so he was kind of been there from the jump. But, I mean, people like Daishen Nix, who actually helped get the Rockets back in the game, started making threes and started getting the offense going. And then eventually we saw Jabari Smith have his best game of the entire Summer League, making shots. I mean, his defense has been good the entire Summer League, but he was actually starting to make shots and look confident taking those shots. He wasn't hesitating. He was getting to the basket, getting offensive rebounds. So, I mean, as we saw, Daishen Nix, Jabari Smith, Tyree Eason had great games. Ty came in. He was pushing the pace. Josh Christopher, he was better. He wasn't hogging the ball as much, but we kind of saw in the fourth quarter, I guess he started getting itchy trigger finger and just started taking shots. But at least he was making most of them. But for the most part, it was, Daishen Nix, it was Ty Washington, it was Jabari Smith. And it was Tari Eason that got the Rockets back in that game, and it, ultimately gave them the lead. But as we saw, Tari Eason and Jabari Smith defense is already next level. I mean, that's something I'm not worried about overreacting because it's summer league, because that's going to translate to the NBA regardless of what the competition that they're playing. So that's the thing I take from it the most, was just the overall defense.
Paolo, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this was, as Richard said, by far the best game. I think defensively, I would probably take the game two rather than this one. But offensively, it showed what a lot of people have been saying. Whenever a high-touted rookie comes into summer league and underperforms, there's always going to be, oh, he's a bust, because social media. Will get into that in the second segment. But this game showed perfectly that most, I guess wiser minds prevailed, because everybody that was paying attention since the beginning and that had looked into Jabari Smith in college could tell that this is a player that's not really a shot creator mold, right? This is a guy that, at least early on in his career, is gonna need someone else to do most of the creating, except for a couple spots on the floor. And he was doing well on those spots on the floor, the few opportunities that he got. But the guard play was so awful that he wasn't getting good looks, and so he wasn't being efficient, because, well, every player on the team was being forced. Every player that's not supposed to be a creator was being forced to jack up shots because the offense is not creating anything. In this game, we finally saw, both Tari and Jabari were. I can't quite remember many ISOs that they got. I think most of the time they were it was either catch and shoot, or they were in the pick and roll as the roll man punishing off of advantages created by the system, by the offense. And that's another big takeaway for me, which is it looked a lot more like basketball this time around. And so it proved what I thought since the beginning, that these guys, at least early on in their careers, are a little bit more of system players versus a guy like Jalen Green last year, that's going to create his own shot a lot. Those guys are always thrive in summer league because it's highly unorganized basketball. And so we finally saw some more organization, and these guys thrived. I mean, we saw a glimpse of what these guys can look like as defensive presences that don't need the ball in their hands to be effective, um, and that can punish the advantages that a guy like Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., and Shingun will be able to create at the next level. We finally got a glimpse of what that looks like, and I mean, everybody was super excited. I was super excited. Tari Eason's, I love Jabari as well, but Tari Eason has quickly become one of my favorite players on this team. My favorite player beforehand was Josh Christopher, so you can kind of tell what my type is. Tari Eason's is like he's quickly climbing up the ranks, and now he's just so fun to watch. I love players that just want it a little bit more than everybody else on the floor.
So in this game, we had Tari Eason go for 11 rebounds, 22 points, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 1 turnover, and 3 assists. If even he hit his threes in this game, he was 2 of 3. 2 of 3 from 3. Without those, he would have been at 22. So he would have been 6 point less. I was promised there was no math, but anyway, without those points, right, he would have still had like an incredible game, right? With the 11 rebounds, 3 assists from him is pretty good. The team high in assists was Knicks with 6, and then after that, Ty with 4. So to be right there almost with Ty in assists, something you definitely love to see. Getting any sort of playmaking out of him and Jabari Smith is like found money, because that's really not what those two's game is really predicated on. But Jabari himself, he went for 19 points. He went for 9 rebounds. So you almost had 2 guys with a double-double in points and rebounds. And neither one of them, neither of those are high usage, high on the ball type of guys, right? Most of their work is done off the ball, attacking closeouts, spotting up, shooting threes, or in transition. I think we'll get into Tari's transition play a little bit later, but just overall in this game, I thought he did a better job this game of trying to make sure he got guys in spots as a creator. To close out the game, you had that play where Knicks ran over a stagger and then found Jabari on the pop for a 3 to kind of ice the game. And that's the kind of looks you have. At least I have been wanting to see more of throughout this postseason, or this preseason. Sorry. even last year they ran a lot of like staggered, they ran a lot of double drag type of stuff, and we just didn't get the defense to react to it because you didn't have guys that were hitting that shot or had the gravity to when they went downhill, the defense would stay with them and things like that. So seeing a set like that, hit in crunch time, I think it was kind of emblematic of what they want to do, what Coach Steven Stiles' offense will kind of graduate into as he's able to slot these guys like Tari and Jabari into it. And then, yeah, I mean, Josh Christopher, I will say, and we'll get into this a little bit in the next segment as well, but he took a little bit of heat for his play style throughout Summer League. We haven't spoken to y'all since after the first Summer League game. So, if y'all want to touch on the second game as well, feel free. But, Josh Christopher, it just seems like he has been really focused on attacking and scoring and playing that part of his game. And, the playmaking for Josh Christopher, like we said, 3 assists, tied with Tari Eason. You'd like ideally to see him not necessarily have the assist numbers higher, but just more kind of cognizant of getting guys in position and orchestrating the offense. It seemed like when he got the ball, he was very focused on attacking and being a scorer first. Yeah. When he comes off the bench, that's probably going to be what his role is for the most part with the big team. So you can understand why that was kind of his focus coming in. You also have the whole thing of, is this guy, quote unquote, too good for Summer League, and players that are coming back for their second year really trying to make their impact on the game scoring wise and things like that. It has thankfully at least gone better for Josh Christopher than it did for Josh Giddey. We won't have to go too deep on that one, but yeah, I just think overall this was a lot more of a team win. Like Lashard mentioned, they got down big early, and it was very good to see that even though this isn't full squad against another team's full squad, the Rockets for the last 2 years have been the fake comeback team. And, we finally got some real comebacks here with, defense really leading the way. And I think that's a good sign. I think, people have really talked about Tari and Jabari and even Tai and like what kind of emotional impact or like leadership type of impact that they can have on the team. And, being able to steady the ship, being able to keep things in perspective when you're down big and, start making the correct plays, getting out in transition and doing those type of things, playing lockdown defense to have a run that gets you back into the game. That's what you want to see as the season goes on with the full squad, right? Is they play well as a team. They're able to, lock in and not really get down on themselves when they do have a bad play or a bad stretch of the games. And, I think that's going to be big. And I think that's going to be something that, as this team grows, having the guys with that level of defensive intensity is going to make it contagious. Kind of like what we talked about with Madison of everyone's going to have that defensive focus and really come and lock in.
Yeah, and I mean, just to Christopher's credit, right?
And just real quick, I just want to
go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead, Lashard.
Oh no, I was just going to say real quick, just to follow up on what y'all were saying. I think it's real important that people understand that Jabari is, and when I say this, it's not a bad thing. He's more of a system player. He's going to fit better with players like Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. He's not going to be Paolo Banchero. He's going to be taking people off the dribble and creating his own shot, at least yet. I mean, he may do this in the future, but once you see him with the main guys on the Rockets, you'll see even a bigger difference in his overall percentage from the field. And also, I think that Josh Christopher will fit back into his regular role of being a backup and not necessarily wanting to be the best player on the court, because I think that's what he's trying to prove, that he's a second-year player, that he's better than any of the rookies that are out there. So he's kind of overcompensating a little bit, trying to get up every single shot. And I think that they probably had a talk with him after the first couple of games, because you could see in the interviews he was mentioning that, saying that he wants to get other people involved like Jabari instead of, taking up all the shots himself.
Yeah, and to his credit, right, he did have like 4 steals and 2 blocks, and a couple of those blocks are like, this is a guard getting these blocks. Like he was getting really high up there, contesting like
the volleyball spike one on I can't remember which Spurs player
at the end of the game.
So
he's been a little bit tunnel vision than in myself. He's my favorite player, but I've been a little bit disappointed on that. But I think this game towards the end and in clutch time, he was playing a lot better. He started off really like slow, but he still got 18 points on 13 shots. He got to the free throw line a bunch. He was a team high, joined with Jabari Smith, plus minus of 23. Right, our starting unit was really the key to winning this game. We were clearly better than the Spurs, and besides that first quarter, like Richard mentioned, where we were just getting cooked by Darius Stays making tough shot after tough shot, and like, well, I guess that's not sustainable. After that, it really felt like we were just a better team, and I think Christopher was a big part of it. Another guy that was a big part of it to me and that deserves his props because I've been flaming him a lot is Deshaun Nix. Right, he was someone who
Yeah.
was missing a lot of reads first couple of games. In this game, he found Jabari on those pick and pop scenarios a lot more, and I think that reflects in Jabari's percentages. They were making it a point, both him and Tai Tai were making it a point to get Jabari going, and I think that's really important because you want Jabari to be confident. If someone is a generational shooter, or at least for their size, you want that guy to not be afraid to shoot. The most important thing is that you just shoot. If it doesn't go in, that's cool. It will eventually go in. Rafael Stone talked about this a little bit, so I really like that those two guys were making it a point to feed Jabari. Then the other thing I wanted to touch on, while we were on the topic of how these guys front solid a little bit, is I really like, besides the defense, which is obviously, I feel like we haven't talked about it that much because it's so obvious that that's the best part of their game. I really, really like their rebounding. I think there's every single game there's a couple rebounds from Cavaro where you're like thinking, how did he get that? And with Tari, with Cavaro it's that, but he's also playing. It's also important to realize Cavaro is playing out of position. He's playing the 5 where naturally he's a 4. So his struggles have got to be taken a little bit with a grain of salt, and I think he's further along being able to play small ball 5 than most people expected. A lot of guys in scouting reports thought he was a great on-ball defender, didn't really know how well he would do in team defense, and he's shown to be really crisp for the most part when playing that way. And so the rebounding, Tyrese and Kuda, like these guys are rebounding the heck out of the basketball. If we ever see a lineup with Jabari Smith, Tyrese, and Albert Shengun himself, who is a really good rebounder, not only just getting the rebounds but boxing people out, it as a Rockets fan, it's satisfying because for the longest time we've been playing small. For the longest time we've been getting out rebounded. We get many possessions a game where the opponent just gets 3-4 shots in a row because we can't secure the rebound, and it sounds like a really simple thing, but and for most teams it probably is, but after so long struggling in that area, you kind of grow to value rebounding a little bit more, and it's one of the things that gets me excited about this group is we are not undersized anymore, and if we ever reach a point where those three are playing together, we have legit size at all 3 positions. Shengun might be a little bit undersized, but in today's NBA, not really. So that's another thing that I wanted to bring up because I as a podcast, we've really valued that. Don himself wanted a big wing for a long time, and I love that Tyrese might be that for us.
All right. So, do you have any closing thoughts on this game, or ready to take it to a break here? Everyone good?
The only other thing I have is other thing I had was just like y'all were saying. I mean, it was just good overall to see them come back and not just basically quit because I mean at one point they were down 17, 18 points and they still fought back and still fought hard, and it's good to see that the young guys have fight, that they're taking this seriously. So I mean you can tell that Tari, Jabari, all of them, they're real professionals. They're taking these games real serious. That it's just not a pickup game to them. So I mean that was just good to see overall, just them fight back and actually come back and win the game and take control of it and not let the Spurs back in it.
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of guys that will say stuff like, "Oh, I'm just someone who's about winning," right? And then they'll on the court, and you're like, "Well, there's all these things you could be doing to play harder and X, Y, Z that you're not doing." You say you're all about winning, but with the guys that have been out there, that we drafted this year, I don't watch any of them play, and I'm like, no, this person is not serious. Like they're playing hard every possession. They're doing all the little things like we said, rebounding, screen setting looks pretty good. Defense are communicating. So when these guys tell me that they're about winning, I am more inclined to believe them when some other people have said something similar. So definitely love to see that. But that gives us a good stopping point to go into break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the favorite things that we love to talk about on this show, and that's Twitter and some of the Rockets players getting into the mix on Twitter as well. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And continuing into our second segment here on the Launchpad podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about one of our favorite topics, and that is Twitter. Earlier today, they released a interview with Bleacher Report with Jabari Smith, and he mentioned social media a bit in there. Josh Christopher also had a social media moment today. So we'll talk a little bit about those and some other things as well. But let's start out with the Jabari interview. Lashard was able to watch that earlier today and just give us a little bit of a breakdown on what was said on that interview and your takeaways from it.
All right. So yeah, with Jabari, they were talking about some of the normal stuff they were talking about, how he felt after he was drafted number 3 instead of number 1. Of course, he said how shocked he was, but after his emotions gotten checked, then he realized that 2 teams passed on him, but the Rockets really did want him. So that's what he was really focused on. That's what he's focused on now. So you can tell that, of course, he has a chip on his shoulder, but he's not going to let that kind of dominate his feelings and his thoughts going forward. He's just really working on his game to, of course, prove to those first 2 teams that they made a huge mistake. So, of course, that was interesting to hear it come, directly from him. He was also talking about a little bit about social media, something that you brought up in the intro to the second segment, just talking about after the first 2 games, how crazy it got, how some of the people were saying some really horrible things about him. Even though it was just 2 summer league games, he actually had to deactivate for a little bit because it got to the point where he just didn't want to hear it anymore, because he had talked about he knows he has to work on his ball handling. He knows he has to work on other parts of his game, and that for people to say that he's not working on it is just crazy, because he is working on it every single day. So he just kind of, went over that and just talked about how, sometimes with social media, things can get crazy and people can really overreact to things, even though he knew he had confidence in his game and he really wasn't worried about it at all. As we saw after game 3, he had his best game of the entire summer league. And then one other interesting thing, they asked him, Taylor Rooks asked him, who would he look forward to guarding in the NBA? And he mentioned Steph and LeBron. So, that was pretty interesting. I'm sure it's going to be a big time moment when he faces, the Lakers and the Warriors. And the first time he locks up either one of those, I'm sure it's going to be all over Rockets Twitter. So those like really the main interesting things that he was talking about in the interview. But it was a really good interview.
I will say, as a Rockets fan, hearing that he wants to lock up Steph Curry, there's nothing you can do to win my heart over quicker than that.
Yes.
But yeah, I did see a little clip on Twitter earlier of the part you were mentioning about when he got drafted. And I think, for Rockets fans, that was such a big – obviously the draft is a big part of any player and any fan base's relationship of, seeing them be selected and putting the hat on for the first time and all of those things. But, with this draft specifically, it was very interesting because, all the fans were under basically the same impression that he was, that, they expected him to go first or expected him to go second. And when he fell to the Rockets, it was just the surprise moment of, we have all been led to believe that this is how this is going to transpire. And I would say, honestly, like, we were at the Rockets watch party over at Post Houston, and I think the reaction that the fans felt was very similar to how he felt. It was like, we thought this guy was going to go first and second, and then it was the surprise of having him drop. And then once the surprise was over, it was like, okay, we got a player that was projected to go first or second. So, there's no L to be taken here. Like, this is a guy that is very high pedigree, has very high skill set, very, very good, malleable skill set to go with our current star, Jalen Green, and everyone was off and running from there. But the stuff about the social media, it's this weird catch-22 of, you love to see the players' personalities and you love to see them interacting with fans, and that's a great way to build their brand and all those types of things. But, it's definitely a challenge of how to balance as a player, right, what they're reading and what they're kind of skimming over, because you do want to have kind of like a pulse of the fan base, and, maybe that they can have, once you're a more established player, you have someone that is kind of, giving that information to you, whether that's Rockets PR or whatever the case may be, if you don't want to read it yourself. But you can tell that these young guys in Tari, and Jabari as well, they're that age, right, where they grew up on social media, they grew up on Instagram, they grew up on Snapchat, all that stuff. And you can tell for these 2 guys, they're very native to social media and being on it. And so I think, being of that age, there's always going to be that pull of, I'm on social media, like I want to see what's going on, I want to see what the narrative is, and things like that. And it's going to be something that he has to balance and find a way to navigate. And hopefully, like we mentioned in the earlier segment, when he gets playing with the big team and he has Jalen and KPJ and Shingun feeding him shots, and he looks better, in that offensive system where his skills can really shine. He won't have to deal with such an avalanche of negative feedback. But Paolo, what are your thoughts on this interview? And then once you're done with that, we can go ahead and move on to Christopher and his incident on social. Well, it's his moment on social media today.
Yeah, I'll speak in general, right? It's as much as these are just random people. When you see something a lot, it's inevitable to just pay attention to it because you're only human, and these guys, and especially when you're a rookie, you can be influenced by this kind of stuff. We got Jabari Smith happened, so he deactivated this week or earlier this week. We had KPJ deactivate earlier on last year when he was struggling to begin the season. We've had Josh Christopher today just firing back at a couple of fans telling him to pass the ball, right? It's just these guys, whatever you think that you can tell them, I assure you, they have coaches that tell them the exact same thing.
Yes.
So it's like you don't have to be strictly positive. And if you have an audience and you want to create your own content, you can criticize players, right? But adding them and making sure they see the criticism doesn't really make sense because, trust me, nobody more than themselves wants to get better. And they have people who are paid to tell them how they can get better. And so I saw some people saying, "Oh, Josh should like those were valid criticisms. You shouldn't just be brushing them off." No, I'm like whatever criticisms are valid, I'm sure the coaches are telling them like these people are paid to do their jobs, and at least when you know that the player's going to see it, I don't see why you wouldn't want to be positive. And I know people have got their own stuff going on, and the thing about those social media is either if you are happy, unhappy, depressed, however you are, you're just one click away from putting a message out there. And that it being that easy is what makes it such a toxic place at times, and it's what makes it so overreactive to every single little thing. And even if even if people were ready that for Jabari not to look great, they would still have done the same thing. And it's just social media. I'm happy that he found it within himself to just shut the noise off, just deactivate for a couple of days. He came back a lot. He came back better. I don't really think it was his fault that he was playing bad, but he did come back better. I don't know if it played a part or not. But yeah, the thing with social media and players is everybody thinks that they're a coach, and when you are competing with other people who are not coaches and you're trying to put your content out there, then it makes sense. If you're actually trying to give advice to the player, trust me, whatever advice you have, they have heard it. It's not if it's correct, they have heard it. So yeah. And I guess to transition into a little bit of a happier message, I thought it was really cool, and I really liked the intangibles on all three of these guys. I thought it was really cool that they were picking each other up on social media. They were picking off tweets from fans that were happy to see them play well, and they were casting each other up. I think that chemistry is really important. I think that they will fit right in with the guys that we already have, and what I like even the most, besides them hyping each other up, is the attitude that they have on the court. I think all three of them are plus defenders, and their effort shows on defense. It's not they have the tools, and so they can afford to take plays off, or they can afford to not be focused all the time and still recover. No, it's that these guys are just, this is summer league. This means basically nothing, or it means very little to the grand scheme of things, but they are giving it their all. And I think that culture is something that's going to be really good with the current players that we have, because we currently have a lot of the raw talent and then the erratic offensive players that are going to be incredible creators and have incredible highlight plays. But they did lack a little bit on the defensive end. We had Jason Tate as a post defender, and then besides that, it was a lot of guys that can play defense, have the tools to play defense. They're not really, those are not their calling cards. And so I loved seeing Jabbar. I loved seeing Tari at the beginning of the game. I posted a video on Twitter of him like hyping Jabari up, like getting him ready. I loved the like Jabari fell and he was like taking his time getting back up. It was a timeout, 20 seconds to go. We're on a close game, and Tari was like, "Yo, you need to get up because we've got a game to win."
Yeah.
And this type of intensity in a summer league game is something that I really love for this team. And in what I guess in what was perceived as a weak draft, to come up with players that, even if like we know that most likely not all of these guys are going to pan out, referring to all of the young players on this team, to have players that can at the very least just set a little bit of a culture and demand more out of each other and foster that development is something that I really value, especially in draft where you're probably not swinging for a superstar player with every pick, and you have one draft prior where you were doing that, and you're probably going to do that again next draft because it's once again called a generational draft, right? I really like that we got players that really hang their hat on defense and that have that intensity, and I'm really excited to see what those guys can bring, because we have in the KPJ, for example, a guy that's a little bit of a question mark. I really think that having guys who are going to give it their all, together with Jay Tate and Josh Christopher, who are already on the team, we're now having, if all of these guys make the rotation, we now have a majority of the rotation being guys that really play really hard on defense. And it's what we talked about before, where if everybody's working really hard and you're not, you're going to stand out. And because of that, I think it will foster a better culture within the team. It's not going to be heat culture or whatever, but that combined with the system culture, I think we're culture-wise and personality-wise, I think we've got a really good group.
So I want to touch on one more social media event from the last day before we round out our super fun social media segment here. And this one involves friend of the show, you could even say host of the show, Paolo himself. He tweeted at Tari's mom, Tari.
Oh, I
She
forgot
said,
about that.
"We still don't have a nickname for Tari. Does he have one we should use, or should we just get creative with it?" She mentioned Peso. I guess that was his nickname he already had, because his shot was money. And then she also said the Ferrari brothers or Tari Ferrari, and she said this one reacting to that. So there we go. There's your nickname update. She also interacted with another tweet. Let me see. Also of Paolo's. Paolo, you've been doing very good at getting the mom engagement on Twitter. He said, when the Rockets play your Celtics, who are you rooting for? And she said, when the Rockets play the Celtics, it's Peso, meaning Tari, against me. And if he loses, I'm dragging him. So, keep it light, keep it competitive in the family. My heart is in Houston, but I'll always be a Celtics fan. My love for my son is higher, but not in lieu of my love for the game. To read that again. So, I think one last one I want to say, and then you can comment, Paulo. So,
Okay.
Brad, another friend of the show, we've been, just very, very active with his mom so far. She said she had a picture of Jabari, and she said, "This is my guy. He's a teenager, like in his teens. You're not ready for what's happening in Houston. Vegas has me in outer space. I'm going to go to bed before I tweet how I really feel." So, very strong reaction to Tari's mom on the game yesterday. I love seeing
one even better
that
though.
can interact. There's one even better. Okay, well,
yes.
I'll say, I love seeing a parent that can interact, have fun, not take it too far in either direction, not get wrapped up in the social media, but still able to get their thoughts out and interact with the fan base. I think that was great to see. Hopefully his mom will continue to interact with us, and people won't say something crazy at her.
Oh well.
How that can go. But all right, Paolo, take away with your last tweet here, and then we'll round it up.
No, I think he's making her case for the. So we have Felicia, who's like the mom of Rockets Twitter. She's like the vice mom of Rockets. She's making the case for it. I think the really fun thing is she tweets like she's one of us sometimes. She has a tweet yesterday saying, it's a picture of three guys on a plane, like pointing at a screen. One guy's pointing at the screen, the other two are looking, and she says, "I don't know what the movie is or whatever." Rafael Stone on the jet with the front office looking at the highlights going. I told you. And I'm not gonna say the the expletive next to that. But there's also a lot of people have been talking about how Tari looks like a really level-headed dude, and there was quite a lot of questions pre-draft
Yeah.
about his IQ, I guess. And I've been one of the people that's been vocal about it. He seems like a really level-headed dude. He seems to on the court. I haven't seen that many lapses that people keep talking about. It's at the very least nothing abnormal for a guy that's a rookie. Um, and I was like, I was going back and forth on that, and he quoted one tweet. I don't think it was mine, but one tweet talking about it. That was making the conspiracy theory about, oh, what if he worked out for the Rockets and it went really well, and so the Rockets just spread this rumor that it went really badly, and that like he has, I don't know, IQ issues, and if that happened, like that's a 200 IQ move from Stone, and I think he quoted it, and he said, I'm trying to find it. He said, "Lol, got him." I don't know what that means, but man, I'm just happy he came here, and I'm really happy that his mom is so fun.
Well, she
Yeah, I
doesn't have a
think
burner account like somebody else's mom has, so that's a good thing.
I
Mom,
saw
I saw.
I saw a tired Mon Bear wired
Yes.
momster. That was a pretty good tweet.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, uh, that was my tweet, by the way, Paolo. Thanks for being a hater that she was reacting to. But yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
it's
bad,
just
sorry.
no, you're fine. It's just I think Tari Eason has very quickly, like you mentioned, due to his play style, due to how hard he plays, defensive motor, and I think his shot has looked pretty good, working with the Rockets coaching staff over the offseason. Hopefully they're able to, work out the form a little bit. I don't think he needs to redo it. We've talked about
Yeah.
that, just some minor tweaks, but I think he's very rapidly rising into the fan favorite. And to have the team's fan favorite and that fan favorite's mom also hyping him up just
Yeah.
like a member of the fan base. It's a very interesting parallel track to see there. So Lashard, you want to touch on any or all of these topics, feel free, and then we'll close out this segment as well.
Yeah, just like I was saying, it also kind of is a Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith culture thing as far as having to go at certain players, having to have hot takes. I mean, that's just kind of what they started, and now everybody is doing it. And now they're really bold and they're doing it directly at the players. But I've always had the thing where if it's something I can't say to them in person, I'm not going to say to them on Twitter. So that's kind of how I've always been. And it's a balancing act trying to, you definitely don't want to be 100% positive because, I mean, they make mistakes. They're human. There are things they do need to work on. Even when Christian Wood was here, I always try not to go too overboard with it, even though his defense at times was horrible. I always try to make it a point to where I'm actually saying something that actually makes sense, that has some thought behind it, not just that he's horrible and he needs to go play in China or somewhere. Just stuff that just out of just left field that people were saying like under his mentions at
Yeah.
times when he would tweet out the most random thing that had nothing to do with anything and people would just go straight at him. And to me,
I
that was
think
just kind of overboard.
the 35 where he just tweeted out 35 and people took
Yeah.
that as him responding to the spaces when it was actually him mentioning that it was his teammate's number from high school who passed away.
Yeah.
That was a very
Yeah,
it's a very
exactly.
dark moment for Rockets Twitter, and that's one why you shouldn't just make assumptions off what people say. But
Mhm.
also, I definitely want to reinforce what you said there of like if you have something, it's better if you have something negative to say about the players, you just tweet that out, put it out. If they want to search their own name, that's on them.
That's different.
But
Yeah.
if you're in the replies, if you're in their mentions, try to keep that positive, and that way, like you said, if they want to go looking for that motivation, they can search their name and find it. But you're not just bombarding them with those things when
Yeah.
they're not going and looking for it. So I think that's
Yeah.
definitely a great point by you, Lashard. That is going to take us into our second break here. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some news that dropped earlier today about Donovan Mitchell. So don't go anywhere. Be right back. And continuing into our third segment here on the Launchpad podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about some news that came out earlier today from Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, which was also, I think, touched on by Tony Jones on T. Jones in the NBA a couple days ago. But they mentioned that Utah may not be actively shopping Donovan Mitchell, but they are actively fielding offers for him. And, last week we had the Brian Windhorst meme extravaganza where he mentioned, what's going on in Utah and all that stuff. So, this just kind of tracks with all of the stuff that he said last week about, are they going to blow it up? That's kind of Danny Ainge's mantra. That's what he did when he brought in Brad Stevens in Boston. He started the rebuild, and that could be the direction that they go in Utah now that they've brought in a new coach there. So, Paolo, uh, always the mock trade fan on this pod. We'll let you start this one off. What are your thoughts on potentially a Utah trade of Donovan Mitchell? Do you want the Rockets to get involved? Would you want the Rockets to get involved as a third-party facilitator? Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. So I think it's so while the Jazz are saying, "Oh, we're not looking to move him, but we're opening to move him," like we've seen this before a million times. It will slowly progress towards they're going to move him. Otherwise, if you have a star player, you're not going to mention that you're willing to move him unless it's way like far down the line. And you're basically already assumed that you're moving him. I think for the Rockets, this means two things: one good thing and one bad thing. I think the bad thing is, well, Utah's blowing it up, and I don't think they're going to try and win, or try to flip Donovan Mitchell for another star or whatever. And so because of that, we're going to have another team that's going to be actively tanking for Wembanyama. There's going to be a team that there's going to be teams like they're taking what every slot in the odds anyways, but having a team actively trying to lose and be one of the worst three teams is definitely not that much of a positive. If you are an advocate of making the play-in, well, that makes us more likely to make the play-in as well. But then the positive thing for us is, well, KD's no longer the one star on the market, which and Donovan Mitchell he's not as good as KD, but he fits the same archetype as a scorer, right?
Yeah.
And he's also on a long-term deal, so just like KD, but he fixes one of the issues with KD, which is KD is 34, and Donovan Mitchell is like 24, 25, and so if you're a team knowing how expensive KD will be, would you rather trade for KD or give up maybe a little bit less assets, but trade for a guy that's younger and that you can have even passes? I know they're both locked up for 4 years, but you can build a future around them, and even after his current contract, you can keep extending them, and you can build something sustainable as opposed to KD, which is, well, we're going all in right now, and we're banking that the sky doesn't fall apart within the next 3 years because not everybody's LeBron, and even KD himself has been injured the last 3 years in a row for a significant amount of games. So I think it's good for us in the sense that, well, the rumors of Brooklyn getting this massive haul have been dying down, and people have been kind of being prepared for, well, maybe they're not going to get as much as they want. People already mentioned a James Harden type of haul. Some people are saying that the James Harden type of haul, according to executives, is the high end of what they can get for KD, right?
Yeah.
And so, knowing that, it's good that another star's on the market, and teams are going to. It takes away a little bit of the leverage that Brooklyn has. When it comes to the Rockets trading for him, good player, right?
Yeah.
To me, he overlaps too much with Jalen Green. I think you probably need Jalen Green to trade for him. I'm not sure if it can be done without him, but if you manage to keep Jalen Green, I don't really like the fit. If you are trading for him, you're giving up a lot of assets. A lot of teams are going to be involved, and I think it's, even though Donovan Mitchell is still young, I think it's too soon, and I'd rather hold off for another type of player to bring on and to spend those assets on. But yeah, that's mostly what I'm sitting at. I don't know how you guys feel.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think the main thing for the Rockets is just being another landing place as far as maybe taking on some bad contracts and then you get some draft picks in return. But as far as, trading for Donovan Mitchell, I mean, to me, you're going to get the same things from KPJ and Jalen Green at a much cheaper price, and then you don't have to give up draft capital to get Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell probably needs to go to a team that's more established, that's trying to win now. And we all know the Rockets aren't trying to win right now. So, I think in the long run, I mean, the Rockets actually trading directly for Donovan Mitchell is definitely not a good idea. But if they want to get in as far as a third team to help facilitate it and maybe get something from it, then I'm definitely fine with that. And like you said, the more stars on the market at this point, the better for the Rockets because they're going to be one of the teams that eventually is going to have that cap space. And I'm fine with keeping the draft capital that the Rockets have and holding on to it as long as you can because as we see now, stars are dropping off a team left and right. Contracts really don't matter. I mean, who knows next year if Boston, flounders and is horrible, maybe Jaylen Brown's going to want out. And then you have the draft capital to go get a player like Jaylen Brown. So to me, yeah, a player like Donovan Mitchell doesn't really do anything for the Rockets right now. It just makes them good enough to not have a good enough draft pick and basically be in purgatory at the very back end of the playoffs and not really get a high draft pick. So to me, if you're a facilitator for maybe a mega trade, that's fine. But trading for a player like Donovan Mitchell right now really doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm right there with Lashard on this. Even though, like Paolo said, Donovan Mitchell's not a super old player.
Yeah.
Just I think it'd be better to wait for someone that's a better fit with the team you already have. Maybe someone who's, if KPJ ends up not panning out, maybe someone who's more of a point guard. If Şengün, we need to get a center to kind of pair with Jabari in that sense. I'm pretty high on Tari right now, so I'm not about to throw Tari out with the bathwater here. I think he's locked in 10 years guaranteed starter. So I was on the Jaylen Brown train for a while, but I think my heart may have been swayed already. But either way, right, there could be some player that comes available that maybe is even better than Şengün, even better than Tari. As much as we love those guys. So you never know. You never know. But yeah, my inclination is tending to agree that if you want to get involved, do it as some sort of third-party facilitator, maybe take on like some bad money, get some assets back, and you can package those together for whatever we want to do in the future. I will say the Scotty Barnes to the Rockets trade segment we did a couple weeks ago got pretty hostile between me, Paulo, and Jackson. So I don't want to go too far down that route again.
A lot more peaceful. It's a lot more consensus.
Exactly. So
I will mention real quick to the point Richard made. If we are getting involved as a third team, Rockets need to define a couple of things, right? Is how long into the future are you willing to take these contracts?
Yeah.
And how confident are you that you'll be able to use the projected 17 million of cap space next year? Because it doesn't need to be either all one way or all the other. You don't need to just sign 2 stars or not do anything. You don't need to just go full out role players. There's a lot of options, and one of the options is you take a lot of. You don't have to take like 70 million worth of bad contracts for picks, right?
Yeah.
You can take 30 million worth of bad contracts, right, for that year, and then spend the rest of them on a couple of role players that you're actually going to play. I think the thing that's been heavily rumored with Mitchell for a long time is the Knicks, and if the Knicks are trading for him, it's a big base package, but you still got to match Mitchell's max contract. I think that the prime candidates to do that are probably Derrick Rose and Evan Fournier, and they would build around. I mean, this is the Knicks, right? You'll build around the team of Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, R.J. Barrett at the 3, Julius Randle at the 4, and Mitchell Robinson or Hartenstein at the 5, right? I mean, doesn't sound too exciting, but it's the Knicks, and we know that they're going for these mid, like we're just trying to make the playoffs teams. And so
Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson just seems like such an undersized backcourt.
Yes.
As skilled as both of those guys are.
Horrible.
Yeah, and it makes you appreciate how much length and athleticism that KPJ and Jalen have. Where it's like, ooh, I'm glad we don't have to worry about that. It's like y'all could deal with those.
a 6'1" back guard, both of them.
Yeah, we're going. I guess we're not going full monster ball, but yeah, 6'5", 6'6" backcourt. Tari's 6'8", Jabari's 6'11", Şengün's 6'10". So yeah, the days of Rocket small ball are thankfully over. My desire for rebounding has absolutely been answered with Tari Eason, if not Jabari Smith as well.
Yeah, and so just to conclude that point real quick, the Knicks would like to use Fournier and Derrick Rose to match the contracts. And if the Jazz want to make a big swing, which I don't think they would, because if you're bottoming out, but whatever. If they for some reason want to get off the contract, even teams that are bottoming out sometimes do this. The Rockets did it with Taurean Prince just 2 years ago, where they were clearly going to a rebuild, but if they could get off a contract for a cheap price or for below market value, the Rockets are someone who could take on Evan Fournier and Derrick Rose, who have both of them have money this year and next year. Fournier has another year, but it's a team option, so If you want to keep him, you can, but it's not guaranteed. And so it would be, how much would you need to forfeit what would be 32.5 million in cap space next year, right? And these are still players; they could probably still play, even though this year I'd probably rather play the young guys. But you could get involved if the Jazz don't want to take on this money, or if for the Jazz it takes a huge amount of assets for them to want to give up Donovan Mitchell and take on really bad contracts. Are the Rockets willing to give the Knicks, I don't know, maybe a little bit lower of a price than what the Jazz would require to take on those contracts? And so in that way, the Rockets could be involved as a third team, get a couple assets out of it. Depends on, once again, how confident you are of the kind of players you're going to be able to get next year. Even if the Rockets did make this deal, they would still have 40 million of cap space next year, and that's still a lot of money. So, yeah, it's one way that they could get involved. Just taking into consideration that the rumor that the Knicks are one of the teams that's been interested for a long time.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's going to do it for us on this episode. If y'all have any thoughts, any comments, if you disagree with us and you want the Rockets to trade for Donovan Mitchell, leave a comment below. We'll address that, or leave a response in the tweet for the pod. Definitely love getting y'all's feedback, but my guess would be most people are fairly on the same page with the Donovan Mitchell trade. But Lashard, we'll go ahead and go to you first. Tell the people where they can find your stuff.
Of course, you can always find me on Twitter at Binkley Hoops. Like I said, I also write for the Dream Shake, so I'm having articles come out usually every week. And you can always listen to me and watch me on YouTube at the Rocket Fuel Podcast, which is printed by Clutch Fans. We have our next show coming up on Saturday. We have Cody Davis, who writes for Sports Illustrated now. He was actually down in Summer League, so we're going to be having him on the show. So definitely make sure you check that out. And actually, in a couple of weeks, we have Mr. Jackson Gatlin. He'll be joining us as well, so that ought to be pretty fun.
There you go.
And don't forget, if you need any more reason to go check Lashard's podcast, they did have Mario Ellie on the podcast.
Yes.
I think it was the last one.
Last week,
Rockets legend Mario Ellie.
Yeah, it was an awesome show. Yeah,
it doesn't get any more hype than that. So make sure to go check that out.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And Paulo, go ahead and plug your stuff.
Yeah, y'all can find me on Twitter as always at PaulAlvesNBA. That's PAULOALVESNBA. Everything I do, from podcasts like this one to the live shows on Twitter Spaces, will find itself linked on there.
And of course, you can find me at Don Knock. You can find the pod at Clutch City CR. Like I mentioned earlier, if you go in the description there, you can find the Linktree link for Apple Podcast, Spotify, and the YouTube link as well. So until next time, y'all, be safe and go Rockets.